Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. This time we're going deep on collocations. You know those phrases that just sound right together, like make a mistake or heavy traffic?
Yeah, those are great examples.
Yeah, so we've got a ton of research and linguistic analyses to dig into today. Oh, and we even found some really interesting examples from real-life conversations that I can't wait to share.
I'm excited to dive in.
Yeah.
What really fascinates me about collocations is how there's so much more than just words that happen to go together.
Okay, I'm listening.
They're like these building blocks for fluency.
Yeah.
Imagine you're trying to build a house, but you only have a jumbled pile of bricks. It just wouldn't work very well, would it?
Yeah, that's a pretty clear visual. You're saying trying to speak a language without mastering collocations is kind of like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Instead of fumbling around with individual words, you can use these prefabricated chunks of language to express yourself so much more efficiently.
That makes a lot of sense. But one thing that kind of tripped me up when I was looking through the source material is that collocations aren't always logical. Could you give us some examples of that?
Absolutely. Let's take the phrase strong coffee. Why do we say powerful coffee? I mean, powerful seems like a perfectly reasonable synonym for strong, but it just sounds strange.
Yeah, it does. And why do we say make a decision but take action? The logic isn't always clear.
I know, right?
It's almost like there's this secret code to these word pairings.
Mhm.
So how do we crack this code? Is it just a matter of memorizing tons and tons of collocations?
Oh, thank goodness, no. One of the best ways to learn collocations is by immersing yourself in real English. When you read a book or watch a movie, pay attention to how words are used together.
So it's more about training our ears to recognize those pairings.
Exactly. You'll start to notice the patterns and internalize those combinations naturally without even realizing it.
Okay, so it's not about forcing ourselves to memorize lists. Got it. And I noticed one of the sources mentioned writing down the entire sentence when you come across a collocation.
That's a fantastic tip
Why is that so important?
because context is key. By writing down the entire sentence, you're capturing the context in which that collocation is used. That way you understand how it's used naturally, and you'll remember it much better.
Oh, that makes so much sense. So it's not just about the words themselves, it's about understanding how they fit into the bigger picture.
Exactly.
Another thing I wanted to ask about, the source material also mentioned using dictionaries to discover new collocations.
Or dictionaries are gold mines for this kind of thing,
How so?
especially monolingual dictionaries. Say you come across the verb catch. You look it up in a good dictionary, and you'll suddenly find all these different collocations. Catch a cold, catch a glimpse, catch someone's eye. It's all right there.
Oh, wow. So the dictionary becomes this roadmap to a whole network of connected words and phrases.
Exactly.
The more you explore those connections, the stronger your understanding of how words work together becomes. I'm starting to see how important mastering collocations is for really taking your fluency to the next level.
It's
No, another point that was made in the source material that I thought was really interesting.
okay, what's that?
It was about the importance of focusing on collocations, using vocabulary you already know. Why is that so important?
Well, think of it like building a house. You wouldn't start by trying to build the roof before you have a solid foundation, right?
Yeah, that would be a disaster.
Exactly.
Okay, so with collocations, it's the same idea.
Yes. By focusing on collocations with words you're already familiar with, you're strengthening the connections between your existing vocabulary. It's like creating this strong base for fluency.
That makes perfect sense. So instead of always chasing after shiny new words, we can unlock a whole new level of expressiveness by focusing on how to combine the words we already know in new ways.
Exactly.
Okay. But this kind of brings up another question for me. I'm wondering if this approach could limit creativity. I mean, won't we end up sounding repetitive if we rely too heavily on these pre-existing collocations?
That's a great question. It's important to remember that collocations are tools, not straitjackets. They provide structure and fluency, but it's up to you to use them creatively and personalize your language.
So it's about finding that balance between using collocations as a framework and injecting your own unique style into your communication.
Exactly. Think of it like you're a chef. You might have a recipe, but you can always add your own special ingredients to make it your own.
Oh, I love that analogy. So collocations are like the recipe, but we're the chefs adding our own spice and creativity to the mix. That's a great way to think about it. So we just had a really great discussion about recognizing and understanding these collocations. But I kind of want to shift gears now and talk about how they actually play into fluency.
Oh, I love that. Because I think collocations really are these unsung heroes when it comes to fluency.
Oh, really?
Think about it. When you're speaking a language fluently, You're not constructing every single sentence word by word in your head, right?
Yeah, that would take forever.
It would be impossible. Instead, you're thinking in chunks.
Mm-hmm.
You're thinking in phrases. And those ready-made combinations are what allow you to speak so smoothly.
So it's like having these prefabricated building blocks that we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. And having that efficiency is super important when you're speaking under pressure. Like giving a presentation or having a spontaneous conversation.
It makes so much sense. So you're not wasting precious brain power trying to remember individual words. You've got these elegant, ready-to-go phrases at your disposal.
Exactly.
Okay, so I get that collocations are essential for fluency. But I'm wondering, could you overuse them? I mean, could using too many make you sound kind of robotic or predictable?
That's a great question. And I think the answer is all about balance. Collocations are super helpful tools, but they shouldn't stifle your creativity.
I see what you mean. So they're kind of like a foundation you can build on.
That's a good way to think about it. Once you've mastered those basic building blocks, you can play around with them, experiment, and create something new and exciting.
So it's not about becoming this robot who can only speak in pre-programmed phrases. It's about using collocations as a stepping stone to greater expressiveness.
Exactly. It's like learning the rules so you can break them artfully. Once you understand how collocations work, you can start bending the rules and creating your own unique style.
I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, now I want to go back to something we talked about earlier, learning collocations from real-life sources.
Yeah.
The sources we read really emphasized avoiding those vocabulary lists. Why is that so important?
Because language is alive. It's constantly evolving and changing. And those pre-made lists they don't capture that dynamism.
So it's about experiencing language in its natural habitat, where those collocations flow naturally from conversations and articles and songs.
Yes. Think about it like learning about wildlife. You wouldn't just study a textbook about animals, would you?
Not if I really wanted to learn about them.
Exactly. You would go out into the field and observe them in their natural environment, right? See how they interact. Language is kind of similar. It comes alive when you encounter it in its authentic forms.
I love that comparison. So instead of dissecting language under a microscope, we should immerse ourselves in its ecosystem and absorb those collocations naturally.
Exactly. And that's why those real-world sources like books, podcasts, even eavesdropping on conversations are so valuable. They provide the context, the nuances that those lists just can't capture.
So we're not just learning words, we're experiencing them.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, now that we understand the importance of real-life sources, I have another question about collocations.
Okay, shoot.
Are all of them created equal? I mean, are some more important to learn than others?
You've hit upon a crucial point, and the answer is no. Frequency is key. The more frequently a collocation is used, the more valuable it is for you to learn.
So it's like with any skill, it's
Yeah.
about focusing on the high-impact things.
Right. The 80-20 rule.
Okay. I want to talk about something that I think is really interesting.
What's that?
It's the fact that collocations often express more than just the sum of their parts.
Yes, they do.
They add this extra layer of meaning that you wouldn't get from the individual words alone.
Exactly. It's like they inject a little bit of poetry into the language.
So instead of saying, I'm sad, you could say, I'm heartbroken.
That's a perfect example. That collocation heartbroken adds so much more emotional weight than just saying sad.
So these collocations become emotional amplifiers.
Exactly. They make your language more powerful, more evocative, more nuanced. And that's what makes mastering them so rewarding.
I feel like this has been so enlightening for me.
I agree.
And I'm sure our listeners are feeling much more confident about tackling collocations.
I hope so.
But before we wrap things up, I want to go back to something we mentioned earlier. The role of collocations in different registers of language.
Oh, yes, that's an important point.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Of course. As we mentioned before, register refers to the level of formality or informality in the language. And just like we choose our clothes based on the occasion, we need to be mindful of register when we're choosing collocations.
So like knowing which collocations to use in a job interview versus at a party with friends?
Exactly. You wouldn't show up to a black tie gala in jeans and a t-shirt, would you?
That would be pretty awkward.
Same thing with language. Using the wrong collocations can make you sound out of place or even undermine your message.
Okay, so I get that we need to be mindful of register, but how do we know which collocations belong to which register?
One tip is to pay attention to the context where you find those collocations. If you're reading a formal academic paper, you're probably going to encounter collocations that are more formal. But if you're watching a sitcom, the collocations will be more casual.
So it's about developing a feel for the situation.
Precisely. It's like developing an ear for music.
Yeah.
With practice, you start to hear the differences between a waltz and a rock song. so you can choose the right style for your purpose and your audience.
I love that analogy. It really highlights the art of using language well.
And that's what makes collocations so fun. It's not just about memorizing rules, it's about understanding how language works and how to use it expressively.
This has been such a rich discussion, and I know our listeners are eager to go out and put what they've learned into practice. But before we wrap up this part, I want to address a really common fear for language learners: the fear of making mistakes.
That's a really important point. It's totally normal to feel a little hesitant when you're trying out new collocations.
Especially if you're not 100% sure you're using them correctly.
Exactly. But it's so important to remember that making mistakes is part of learning. It's like learning to ride a bike. You're going to fall a few times before you find your balance.
So we should see mistakes as opportunities to grow and improve.
Absolutely. Every mistake is a chance to refine your understanding and get one step closer to fluency.
Okay, so if you slip up and use a collocation incorrectly, don't beat yourself up about it.
Just learn from it and move on. Remember, even native speakers make mistakes with collocations sometimes.
That's good to know. I make plenty of mistakes, and I'm a native speaker. So as we head into the final part of our deep dive, I want to encourage everyone listening to embrace the journey, experiment, play around, and see those mistakes as valuable lessons. Now, in the next segment, we're going to do a deep dive into a really fun aspect of collocations. Those weird, illogical combinations that make English so quirky.
Those are some of my favorites. They remind us that language is constantly evolving and it's full of surprises.
Okay, so welcome back to the final part of our deep dive on collocations. We've talked about why they're so important, different types, and how they can make you sound more fluent. But now I want to have a little bit of fun.
Okay, I'm game.
Let's talk about those weird, illogical collocations that make you scratch your head and think, wait, why do we say it like that?
Oh, I love those. This is so interesting. They remind us that language isn't always neat and tidy. There are all these quirks and idiosyncrasies that have developed over time.
The source material had some really good examples, like why do we say make a bed but do the dishes? Making a bed seems like it involves a lot more doing than washing dishes.
Right. And why do we say catch a cold, but we don't say catch a headache? It's just so strange when you think about it. These illogical collocations, they're like little puzzles.
I like that, linguistic puzzles. And the source material suggests that we should embrace these oddities. Why is that?
Well, for a couple of reasons. First, they're memorable. Because they're so unusual, they tend to stick in our minds better.
It's like a song with a weird lyric that you just can't get out of your head.
Exactly. And second, these quirky collocations, they often give us these little glimpses into the history and culture behind the language, like the phrase kick the bucket, meaning to die. It might seem bizarre now, but it actually probably came from a specific practice centuries ago.
So these odd collocations aren't just random. They offer these fascinating insights into how the English language has evolved, how it's been shaped by all these cultural and historical events.
Exactly. They're like little linguistic fossils.
Okay, so I think this is a good time to bring up that challenge from the source material.
Oh, yes. I had forgot about that.
It was for our listeners.
It encouraged them to share some of the weirdest or funniest collocations they've come across.
So if you've encountered any of those head-scratching collocations, we want to hear about them. Share them in the comments below. Let's have a good laugh and learn from each other.
I'm looking forward to seeing what everyone comes up with.
Me too. It's such a great way to wrap up our deep dive into collocations. We've talked about why they're so important, how to learn them, and even how to appreciate those quirky combinations that make English so unique.
It's been such a pleasure exploring this topic with you.
Likewise. So as we say goodbye, just remember that mastering collocations is a journey. Keep your ears open for new and interesting word pairings, write them down, and practice using them as much as you can. And don't be afraid to make mistakes.
That's right. Those oops moments are actually some of the best learning opportunities.
So embrace the challenge, have fun with it, and keep those collocations flowing.
Happy learning, everyone.